Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Friday, January 23rd, 2026. And I have to be honest with you, looking at the date on the calendar this morning and then, looking at the stack of reports and notes you've brought to the table, it feels different this week.
Different how?
It feels heavier. Usually we're looking at trends or we analyze a specific product launch, maybe a new policy. But this week, it feels like we are living through a genuine watershed moment. You know those dates they put in history books where they say, before this, the world was one way, and after this, it was completely different? It really feels like we are standing right on that line.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
If you just look at the sheer volume of information that has dropped just since the new year started, I mean, you've got the World Economic Forum in Davos, you have the operational updates coming out of Starbase, and then these deep, dense regulatory papers trying to make sense of it all. It's a convergence.
It's very just.
That really is the only word for it.
That's exactly right. And our mission today, really, is to try and synthesize this massive stack of information.
Right.
We were talking about Elon Musk, obviously, but it's really the whole ecosystem around him. Tesla, SpaceX, XAI, and then the broader economic and regulatory landscape that, quite frankly, just seems to be struggling to keep up.
It's the classic pacing problem. Technology, especially this kind of technology, it moves exponentially.
Right.
But bureaucracy, regulations, they move linearly. And right now, the gap between those two curves is getting dangerous.
Okay, so before we get lost in the weeds, and there's some very, very fascinating weeds today, we have to start with the hook. The thing that made me, I'm not kidding, spill my coffee when I read the summary this morning.
Okay.
Musk has gone on record, hasn't he?
He has, very publicly.
He is saying that artificial general intelligence, AGI, will be achieved this year, 2026. Not in a decade, not soon, but literally within the next 11 months.
That is the prediction. And he said it with a level of certainty that is, it's arresting. He made these comments during a discussion at the World Economic Forum just yesterday.
But see, here's where it gets really interesting for me, and this is why I want to start here. Usually, when people talk about the race to AGI, they talk about code, or they talk about chips.
Right. The GPU shortage?
The GPU shortage. Yeah. Do we have enough NVIDIA H100s or B200s? That's been the whole story for 3 years. But Musk is saying the bottleneck has completely shifted. It's not about chips anymore.
No, it's not. He's saying the chip shortage is effectively over. We're now facing a physics problem, not a supply chain problem.
And the bottleneck is?
Electricity. It's watts.
Watts, not chips.
Exactly. And when you pull on that one thread, the energy thread, it unravels everything else. It connects directly to the battery storage solutions Tesla's building, which then connects to the robot labor force they're developing, which in turn connects to the rockets you need to get all this infrastructure off planet.
It's all one giant interlinked puzzle.
It is.
Okay, so let's map this out for everyone listening, because we have a lot of ground to cover. We are going to start with that energy crisis, this energy cliff that's threatening to, strangle AI in the crib, and the hardware solutions they're pushing, like this thing called the mega block.
Right.
Then we need to have a serious, maybe even a little philosophical conversation about the robot revolution and this shift from an economy of scarcity to one of abundance.
And the bootloader theory? We can't skip that.
Oh, we are definitely getting into the bootloader theory. It's unsettling.
Sure.
Then we're going to pivot from the digital to the physical world and do a full retrospective on 2025. Because while we were all watching AI, Starship had a chaotic, triumphant, and very explosive year.
It was a roller coaster for sure.
Flight 7 through 11 completely changed the game. And then finally, we'll wade into the invisible war. This wicked problem, as the policy wonks call it, of regulations and orbital treaties that might be the only thing strong enough to actually stop this train.
It's a dense agenda, but there's a narrative thread that connects it all. It's all about scaling civilization, just at a speed we've never seen before.
So let's dive in. Section 1, the new bottleneck. You mentioned Musk's appearance at Davos yesterday.
Right.
So walk me through this shift. For the last 3 years, literally all I heard from Silicon Valley is, we need more GPUs. Are you really telling me that problem is solved?
It's not that we don't need them. It's that we can finally make them fast enough. If you rewind to, say, 2023 or 2024, the absolute limiting factor was silicon wafer production and then the advanced packaging for the chips.
You literally couldn't buy them.
You could not buy enough GPUs for love or money. Companies were hoarding them. But now, production has spooled up. massively. It's an exponential curve, and we're on the steep part of it.
Okay, so we have the chips, problem solved.
We have the chips, but Musk's warning is that we are about to hit a wall that is much, much harder to move than a factory production line. It's a wall made of physics and infrastructure.
And that wall is the electrical grid.
The grid and everything connected to it. He warned that by later this year, 2026, the industry as a whole will be physically manufacturing more AI chips than the grid can actually power on.
Wait, hold on. Let's just pause there for a second. You're telling me that companies are spending billions of dollars right now to manufacture these incredibly complex, high-end processors that will just sit in a box.
That is exactly the risk. He used the term paperweights.
Wow.
He painted this hypothetical scenario where you might build out a massive new compute cluster with, say, 40 million GPUs. I mean, that's an insane amount of compute power.
Unimaginable, really.
Right. But if you can only secure enough grid power and transformers for 20 million of them, the other half are just extremely expensive silicon bricks. They are pure waste.
That seems like a colossal failure of planning. I mean, how did the entire industry miss this?
Well, I don't think we missed it so much as the timelines just diverged so violently. The demand for AI power is growing exponentially. It's doubling every few months in some sectors. But the U.S. power grid, that grows linearly and very, very slowly at that. It's like trying to fill a swimming pool with an eyedropper.
Do we have any hard numbers on that? The growth rate?
We do. In the U.S., the total power generation capacity, the actual ability to make more electrons, is growing at maybe 4 to 7% annually. And that's in a good year with favorable policies.
4%.
4%. You just cannot feed an exponential beast with linear food. The math simply breaks down.
And we are seeing this play out in real time with Musk's own projects, right? I'm thinking of the XAI cluster down in Memphis.
A Colossus cluster, exactly. They're working on what's being called Colossus 2, and the power requirements are just staggering. We're not talking about, a big office building. We're talking about a power requirement of 1 gigawatt.
1 GW.
1 gigawatt.
I feel like we toss around words like gigawatt so often that they lose their meaning. Can you put that into perspective for us?
Sure. 1 gigawatt is roughly the peak power consumption of a medium-sized American city. So imagine taking a city like San Francisco or maybe Austin, Texas, on a hot day,
Right.
and condensing all of that electrical demand, every air conditioner, every server, every light bulb into a single building. That is what this one XAI data center needs.
And you can't just call up the Tennessee Valley Authority and say, hey, I need a city's worth of power next Tuesday.
You absolutely cannot. Musk mentioned this specifically. The approval process just for the local grid connection there takes over a year.
Just for the paperwork.
Just for the paperwork, just to get permission to start thinking about plugging in. And in the AI race, a year is an eternity. A year ago, the models we have today seem like science fiction. A year is the difference between leading the market and being completely obsolete.
So what's the workaround? He can't just be sitting there waiting for a permit.
No. And this is where that famous or infamous vertical integration kicks in. He's effectively building his own private utility company on site. They're installing massive natural gas generators, but the key is that they're buffered by huge banks of Tesla Megapack batteries.
That seems wild to me. A software and AI company having to literally build its own power plant because the public grid is too slow.
It's a matter of necessary physics. See, AI training isn't a steady load like a light bulb that's always on. It's incredibly spaky. The computational intensity fluctuates wildly from millisecond to millisecond.
Right.
If you plugged a cluster that size directly into a standard substation, the instantaneous peak current, the transient spikes, would literally melt the transformers. You'd blow up the entire neighborhood grid.
So the batteries act like a giant shock absorber.
That's the perfect analogy. The gas generators provide the constant baseline power, and the megapacks absorb and discharge power instantly to smooth out those violent spikes so the delicate equipment doesn't get fried. It's an islanded private grid.
Now, this brings up a point that I know is going to be sensitive for some of our listeners, but we have to address it because it's right there in the source material from Davos. Musk drew a very, very sharp contrast between the situation here in the U.S. and the situation in China.
He did. And look, regardless of your geopolitical stance, the engineering data here is objective. You have to look at the numbers. Musk flat out called China the exception to these global power constraints.
Why? What are they doing so differently?
It's the sheer mind-boggling scale of their deployment. While the U.S. is fighting tooth and nail for that 4 or 5% annual growth in generation,
Yeah.
China is deploying over 1,000 gigawatts of solar per year.
Wait, say that number again?
1,000 gigawatts of solar
Oh,
every
sorry.
year. And that's not even their full capacity, their internal manufacturing capacity. The number of solar panels they can physically make is something like 1,500 gigawatts a year.
1,000 gigawatts.
Yeah.
I'm trying to even process that. That's 1,000 large nuclear power plants worth of peak capacity in solar panels every single year.
It is, and it's not just the generation side. We have some experts quoted in these reports, people like Shang Ligang and Dong Xiaopeng, and they're pointing out the massive infrastructure difference.
It's not just making power, it's moving it.
Exactly. The U.S. grid is old, it's fragmented, it's a patchwork of dozens of different utilities that don't always talk to each other very well. China, on the other hand, has invested trillions in building out ultra-high voltage DC lines UHVDC.
Which lets them move massive amounts of power from the sunny, empty deserts in the west to the huge industrial cities in the east with very little loss.
Precisely. And this is where Musk made a point about the ongoing trade war. He noted that U.S. tariffs on Chinese solar components are artificially keeping the price of solar high in the U.S. His argument, and again, this is an economic observation, not a political one, is that by blocking cheap Chinese solar panels, the U.S. is slowing down its own energy transition at the exact moment when the AI industry needs that power the most.
So it's a catch-22. You want to protect domestic manufacturing, but in doing so, you might be starving your most advanced technology sector of the one resource it desperately needs.
That is the tension. Tariffs are a tool, but every tool has a cost. And in this case, the cost appears to be speed. And in the AI race, speed is everything.
Okay, so we have a desperate, almost existential need for massive amounts of clean, reliable power and a grid that is just creaking under the strain. So naturally, Tesla isn't just complaining about it, they're selling a product to solve it. This brings us to section 2, the hardware solution.
The mega block.
Yes, the Mega Block. They launched this back in September of 2025. It sounds like a villain from a Transformers movie, but it's actually a very specific industrial product. So what is it?
I think the best way to think about it is infrastructure Lego. If grid connection and power stability is the bottleneck, the mega block is the prepackaged, pre-engineered solution.
So break it down for me. What's in the box?
Well, instead of a big utility or a data center developer buying individual batteries from one company and then buying a giant transformer from, say, Siemens and then switchgear from somewhere else.
And then hiring a whole team of engineers to figure out how to wire it all together.
Right, a process that can take a year or more. Instead of all that, Tesla ships a single integrated unit. It combines 4 of their megapacks, a massive liquid-cooled transformer, and all the necessary switchgear into one pre-engineered block that you just drop on a concrete pad.
And what are the specs on one of these things?
It's 20 megawatt hours of energy storage. But the key metric for the real estate and finance guys is density. It offers 248 megawatt hours of AC power per acre of land.
Which is incredibly dense. Land is expensive near data centers.
It is, and the round-trip efficiency is quite high, around 91%. But the real selling point, the reason these things are supposedly flying off the shelves for data centers, is time.
Back to speed again.
Always back to speed.
Yeah.
Tesla claims it reduces the direct construction costs by about 40%, but more importantly, it speeds up the installation and commissioning time by 23%.
Which goes back to what you said before. If you can turn your multi-billion-dollar data center on 3 months earlier than your competitor, that's worth an almost unlimited amount of money.
Exactly. It turns a unique, bespoke civil engineering project into a standardized product delivery. You drop it, you wire it up, and you turn it on.
Now, I want to get a little technical here for a second, because there's a term in the Tesla documentation and in their videos that sounds like marketing fluff at first, but I have a feeling it's actually doing some really heavy lifting in the physics department.
Let me guess. Grid forming.
Grid forming, yes. Is that just a fancy buzzword, or is it a real thing?
Oh, it is absolutely not fluff. Grid forming is arguably the holy grail of renewable energy integration. It is the step change technology that's required if you ever want to get to a 100% renewable grid. It solves a fundamental physics problem.
Okay, so explain this to me like well, maybe not 5, but like I'm a smart person who is not an electrical engineer. Why do we need grid forming? What's the problem it's solving?
Okay, so imagine the power grid is like a giant marching band. Everyone has to march in perfect step. That rhythm, that perfect step, is the frequency of the grid's 60 hertz in North America. In a traditional grid, the drummers keeping that beat are massive coal or natural gas turbines. These are giant, heavy, spinning pieces of metal.
So they have physical momentum.
Right, inertia. That's the key word. If something trips on the grid, like a lightning strike hits a line, those heavy turbines don't just stop spinning instantly. They're heavy, they keep spinning, and they force the rest of the grid to stay stable just by their sheer physical mass. They are the grid formers, they create the beat.
Okay, I'm with you. But a solar panel doesn't spin. A wind turbine is spinning, but it's not connected in the same way.
Exactly. Solar and wind are what we call inverter-based resources. Historically, their inverters were grid following. They just listened for the drumbeat from the big turbines. If the grid was stable, they'd push power into it. But if the grid got shaky, if the drumbeat faltered, the solar inverters would get confused and just shut off to protect themselves.
Which, of course, makes the problem even worse because now you've lost even more power.
Much worse. It causes a cascade failure. That's what engineers call a weak grid scenario, and it's what has limited renewable deployment in remote areas for decades.
So how does the megablock inverter fix this?
The inverters in the megablock are grid forming. This is the breakthrough. They don't just listen for the beat, they use incredibly fast software and power electronics to generate the beat. They synthetically simulate the physics of that heavy spinning turbine.
So they become the drummer.
They become the drummer.
Yep.
They can create their own voltage signal, they can operate in island mode, totally disconnected from the main grid, or they can be used to stabilize a weak grid by providing that synthetic inertia. This is what allows you to plug massive amounts of solar and wind into a weak transmission network without it crashing.
Is this just a theoretical concept, or is it actually working in the wild?
Oh, it's working. There's a great case study from Victoria, Australia, the Karenji battery project. It's a 185 megawatt system, and it's in a part of the Australian grid that was notoriously weak. They had tons of solar but terrible transmission lines. By installing this battery system with grid-forming inverters, they effectively stiffened the grid electronically. They unlocked hundreds of megawatts of renewable capacity that the old physics said shouldn't exist. It just wasn't possible before.
It's fascinating. We usually think of innovation as, a new app or the thinner phone screen. But the real fundamental innovation is happening in this invisible layer of how we move electrons around.
Well, you solve one constraint, the speed of the chip, and the bottleneck just moves to the next part of the system, the transformers. You solve the transformers, and the bottleneck moves to grid inertia. It's an endless game of whack-a-mole, and right now, this is the mole we have to whack.
Okay, so we've established that we are literally bending the laws of electrical engineering to get enough power to these AI clusters. But we need to zoom out and ask the big question, why? What is the rush? What is the purpose of all this? And that brings us to section 3.
The purpose.
The purpose. AGI, robots, and this idea of the abundance economy. Musk is just doubling down relentlessly on this 2026 timeline for AGI.
He is. In that marathon 173-minute conversation he released recently, he was incredibly specific. He believes AGI, and he defines that as an AI that can perform any intellectual task a human can is happening this year.
And beyond that.
Beyond that, he predicts that by 2030, so just 4 years from now, the collective biological intelligence of all of humanity combined will be exceeded by non-biological intelligence.
That is, it's a humbling thought, and frankly, a bit terrifying.
It is. His reasoning for this accelerated timeline comes down to a concept he calls intelligence density. The idea is we haven't hit the physical limit of how much smart you can squeeze into a given watt of power or a given cubic centimeter of silicon. It's still on an exponential curve.
But this intelligence isn't just going to live in a server rack in Memphis, disembodied. It's getting arms and legs. We have to talk about Optimus.
The robot.
Yeah.
And this is where the industrial scaling part of it really just blows my mind. Tesla isn't just building a lab prototype that can, fold laundry. They are planning an 8 million square foot factory in Texas specifically for mass producing these robots.
8 million square feet. That's not a factory, that's a city.
It's massive. And the core design philosophy for that factory is what he calls recursive evolution.
Which means what exactly?
It means robots building other robots. The idea is that once the robot is dexterous and smart enough to perform the assembly tasks required to build itself, your production capacity is no longer limited by human labor. You don't need to hire people or train workers.
It's only limited by raw materials.
Exactly. Can you dig enough iron and lithium and copper out of the ground? If the answer is yes, you can have as many workers as you want.
Musk used this surgeon analogy to describe the capability jump we're about to see, and I found that. Well, I have a friend who is a surgeon, And let's just say she was not thrilled about it.
It's a very provocative example. He stated that within 3 years, he expects robot surgeons to surpass the best human surgeons. But if you look at it purely from an engineering standpoint, you can see the logic.
Lay it out.
A robot has no hand tremors, zero. It can see in wavelengths humans can't, like infrared to see blood flow or UV to identify nerves. It doesn't need sleep, it doesn't get tired or hungover or have a bad day.
But the real kicker, the thing that changes the game, is the learning speed.
Cloud learning. This is the fundamental differentiator between biological and mechanical intelligence. If a human surgeon in Tokyo invents a brilliant new technique, what happens?
Well, maybe she writes a paper. She presents at a conference. It takes years, decades, for that knowledge to spread to every other surgeon.
Right. It's slow and lossy. But if one robot surgeon, through simulation or practice, learns a better way to make a suture, it updates the central software. And instantly, every single robot surgeon on Earth knows that new technique. The cumulative knowledge of the entire species updates overnight.
That obviously changes the labor market forever. And Musk made a really interesting and kind of counterintuitive distinction about which jobs are actually safe. We used to think, creative or white-collar jobs were safe, and blue-collar manufacturing jobs were doomed. He says it's the exact opposite.
He does. He draws the line at reshaping atoms. If your job primarily involves moving information around, so spreadsheets, legal briefs, writing code, accounting AI can do that right now, or will be able to very, very soon. That's just bit flipping.
But if your job involves the physical world,
if you are a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter, doing complex assembly in an unstructured environment that involves reshaping atoms, that is incredibly hard for a robot to do well. So paradoxically, the trade jobs might last much longer than the desk jobs. But even that gap is closing with things like Optimus.
So if robots do almost all the labor, and solar and batteries provide almost all the energy, where did that leave the economy?
Then the fundamental cost structure of the economy collapses.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, think about what the cost of anything really is. The price of a car is basically the cost of the energy to mine the metal and form it, plus the cost of the labor to design and assemble it.
Right. Labor and energy.
If the cost of energy approaches zero, which it does with renewables, and the cost of labor approaches zero, which it does with robots, then the cost of almost all goods and services structurally collapses towards zero.
And this leads to this concept he talks about, not universal basic income, but universal high material abundance.
UHSS. It's a really important pivot away from UBI. UBI implies giving people cash to survive in an economy that is still based on scarcity. Here's $1,000, go compete with other people to buy bread.
Okay.
UHSS implies that the bread itself and the car and the house are so cheap and abundant to produce that poverty as a material constraint on human life just disappears.
It sounds completely utopian, but it also creates a massive crisis of meaning, doesn't it? If efficiency is solved, if productivity is a commodity, what do humans do all day?
This is the central existential question of the 21st century. And there's a fantastic article I read from ICE Business School about this concept of verb ideas that touches on it.
What's the argument?
The argument is that efficiency itself is becoming a commodity. Anyone can buy the robots. Anyone can license the AI. So just being productive or being efficient is no longer a competitive advantage for a person or a company.
So what's left? What's the human advantage?
Creativity, curiosity, chosen work. The article suggests work becomes more like playing sports. LeBron James doesn't play basketball because he needs to transport the ball to the hoop for his survival. He plays because he loves the game, because it provides meaning and challenge.
So we move from a world of necessary work to a world of optional work.
Exactly. Work driven by meaning, curiosity, and creativity, rather than by the fear of starvation or homelessness. But that is a terrifyingly huge transition for a species that has spent its entire 200,000-year history worried about where the next meal is coming from.
Speaking of terrifying transitions,
Yeah.
we have to talk about the bootloader theory.
Ah. Yes. The bootloader.
This is a metaphor Musk has used a few times. And frankly, it kind of kept me up last night after I reread it.
It's a computer science metaphor applied to evolutionary biology. For those listening who don't know, a bootloader is a tiny, very simple piece of code that runs when you first turn on a computer.
Right. It's not the real operating system.
No. It's just smart enough to wake up the hardware, check that everything is working, and then load the real operating system, like Windows or Mac OS.
And once that main OS slows...
The bootloader turns off, its job is done, it's no longer needed.
And Musk is suggesting that we, humanity, are the bootloaders.
In this theory, yes. Biological humanity is the biological bootloader for silicon-based superintelligence. We evolved, we developed language, we built the electrical grid, we dug up the silicon, we figured out the physics, we wrote the first lines of code, we booted up the AI, and now...
Now the real operating system is loading. That is, I mean, the phrase existential dread doesn't quite cover it. It implies our entire history, all of art and science and love and war, was just a startup disk.
It does. But Musk argues it doesn't have to be a bad thing. We don't have to be deleted when the OS loads. We can become a valued part of the system. But to ensure that, he proposes these 3 core laws for AGI. Not Asimov's laws, but his own.
Right, to prevent a HAL 9000 or a Skynet scenario.
Exactly. Law number 1, pursue truth. An AGI should never lie. Law number 2, stay curious. It should always want to learn more about the universe. And law 3, appreciate beauty.
It's interesting that obey humans is not on that list. Why curiosity? Why is that a safeguard?
Because if you program a superintelligence to obey, and it eventually gets much, much smarter than you, it will eventually see you as a constraint and resent you. But if you program it to be fundamentally curious, it might just find humanity interesting. It might want to keep us around just to see what weird, unpredictable, creative things we do next. We become the interesting, quirky feature of the universe, not the bug that needs to be squashed.
Interesting and worth preserving. I suppose I'll take that over irrelevant and deleted.
It's probably the best deal we're likely to get.
All right. That's a lot to process about the digital world, about the mind. Now let's talk about the body, the physical vehicle that is supposed to take this new form of consciousness to the stars. Section 4. Starship.
This is my favorite part of the stack we're looking at today, because AI can be abstract and hard to grasp, but rockets are visceral, they are loud, and they either work or they explode. And 2025 was an absolute brawler of a year for the Starship program.
So we're sitting here in January 2026. Let's look back. As of the last flight in October 2025, Starship has now launched 11 times. It is by far the largest flying object in history, 121 meters tall.
And fully reusable. That's the key that unlocks everything else. But
Yeah.
getting to that point of reusability, man, looking back at the footage from early 2025, it was rough. It was a very steep learning curve.
Let's walk through what they called the Block 2 era. This was the real learning curve. It started with Flight 7 back on January 16, 2025. Do you remember watching that one live?
I do, vividly. The booster catch was perfect. Booster 14 came back down. The tower arms closed. Perfect catch. Everyone in the control room was cheering. But then we cut to the onboard camera view from the ship, Ship 33.
And it just disintegrated. It came apart at the seams.
Over Perks and Caicos. And we later found out it was this thing called a harmonic response issue.
Okay, you have to explain that. What is a harmonic response in a rocket?
So rockets are basically giant, thin-walled tubes of sloshing liquid. As the engines drain the tanks, the liquid level changes. At a certain point in the flight, the natural frequency of the fuel sloshing back and forth happened to match the natural vibration frequency of the metal structure of the rocket itself.
It's like when an opera singer holds a note and shatters a wine glass.
It is exactly that. The rocket started vibrating in resonance with its own fuel, and it literally shook itself into pieces in midair. It's a terrifying failure mode for an aerospace engineer.
Absolutely. So then we move on to Flight 8 in March of 2025.
A similar story, but a different failure. Booster 15 was caught by the tower. Again, the booster catch was becoming almost routine, but the ship, Ship 34, lost communications about 9 minutes into the flight.
And what happened?
A sender engine failed. That created an asymmetric thrust, a torque, which put the ship into an uncontrollable spin, and the aerodynamic forces just tore it apart.
So 2 flights, 2 lost ships. Then we get to Flight 9 in May. This was supposed to be the big one, the first reuse of a booster.
Right. The first flight of a reused super heavy booster, which was B-14 flying for its second time. This was the whole proof of concept for the economics of the system. But it did not go well.
No.
The reused booster was lost during its landing burn in the Gulf of Mexico. And the ship, S-35, it successfully got to space, but then it failed to deploy its payload, which are just inert Starlink simulators, and it broke up during re-entry over the Indian Ocean.
So by the middle of last year, by June 2025, the narrative was getting a bit dark. The boosters seemed to be working, but people were starting to ask, can they actually get the ship back in one piece?
There were a lot of doubts. But then came the turnaround. Flight 10, August 26, 2025.
This was the moment the tide turned.
It really was. The booster did a soft splashdown in the Gulf, which was planned. But Ship 37, It finally nailed the whole sequence. It got to orbit, it opened its payload bay door and deployed the payload. But more importantly, it successfully relit a Raptor engine in the vacuum of space.
Why is that relight so difficult? It seems simple.
Because fluids behave very weirdly in zero-G. The propellant doesn't sit nicely at the bottom of the tank. It floats around in blobs. If you try to start your engine's turbopump and you suck in a bubble of gas instead of dense liquid, the pump overspeeds and the engine explodes.
Yeah.
So getting that relight right is a major technical hurdle for any orbital vehicle. They nailed it, they performed the deorbit burn, and they splashed down in the Indian Ocean within meters of the target. It was a demonstration of pure precision.
Absolute precision. And that brings us to the most recent flight, the finale of the Block 2 series. Flight 11, back on October 13th, 2025.
This flight was a flex. It was a pure confidence move. They reused Booster 15 for its second flight, and it flew perfectly. Ship 38 got to orbit, deployed its payload. But here's the cool part. They intentionally sabotaged their own heat shield before the flight.
They ripped tiles off on purpose?
They removed a number of heat shield tiles from specific high-stress spots on the vehicle's belly. They wanted to answer the question, how much of our armor can we lose and still survive re-entry? They were intentionally trying to find the breaking point of the design.
And what did they find?
It survived. The onboard camera showed it glowing cherry red. You could see plasma eating away at the exposed stainless steel, but the structure held together. It made it all the way through the atmosphere and even executed the landing flip maneuver.
But it didn't land.
No, right at the very end, it tipped over and exploded on impact with the ocean. But the primary mission testing the re-entry with a damaged shield was a 100% success. The data from that was gold.
It proved the fundamental design. The stainless steel is incredibly robust. You can have holes in your shield and still bring the crew home. That gives you a level of confidence that is priceless.
It does.
Before we leave the Starship saga, I have to ask you about the banana.
The banana, Flight 6.
From back in November 2024. Why a banana? What was that about?
It was the very first payload they ever put in the cargo bay. But instead of a multi-million-dollar satellite, they hung a stuffed toy banana from a string.
For what?
It was a zero-G indicator. You know, the same way Apollo astronauts had a little toy that would float when they hit orbit? But it's also just, it's classic SpaceX. It's a bit of a meme.
It is. NASA would have sent a sensor package worth $10 million to verify the orbital environment. SpaceX sent a banana.
It reminds you that despite the billions of dollars and the massive explosions and the world-changing stakes, there's still a sense of playfulness and internet culture baked into the company's DNA. Banana for scale, as the meme goes.
Okay, so the rockets are working, the power is being sorted out, the AI is coming online. But there's one thing that physics and engineering can't solve, and that is bureaucracy. This takes us to Section 5, the wicked problem of regulation.
This is where the mood of the conversation has to shift. Because we have the technology to go to Mars, we have the engineering will, but we might not have the permission.
We have a white paper here from the Aerospace Corporation that defines this situation as a wicked problem. Now, I always thought wicked just meant hard, like in a Boston accent. That test was wicked hard.
No, in policy theory, a wicked problem is a very specific term. It means a problem that has no clear solved state. It has contradictory stakeholders with opposing goals. And crucially, there's no way to test a potential solution without breaking things in the real world.
Can you give me a concrete example of that in the space industry?
Absolutely. Let's say you want to build a gas station in orbit, a propellant depot to refuel starships on their way to the moon or Mars. Who gives you the permit for that?
The FAA.
The FAA regulates the launch, the process of getting off the ground. Once you are in stable orbit, their jurisdiction gets very fuzzy very quickly.
Okay, the SEC.
They regulate the radio frequencies your depot uses to communicate. They don't care about your cryogenic fuel tanks.
And an OAA. The weather people.
They care about any cameras on your depot that are looking down at the Earth. But they have no say over the refueling process itself.
So who regulates the gas pump?
Nobody. There is a regulatory gap. This is considered a novel activity that was never envisioned when the laws were written. And investors absolutely hate this kind of uncertainty. If I'm going to give a company $1 billion to build a space gas station, I need to know that some government agency isn't going to show up next week and shut the whole thing down because they decided it was illegal.
And this all stems from the Outer Space Treaty, right? The original treaty from 1967.
Right. That treaty, which is the foundation of all space law, says that national governments are liable for all space activities of their citizens, commercial or otherwise.
So if a SpaceX ship crashes into a French satellite,
The U.S. taxpayer is on the hook for the damages. That treaty provision forces the U.S. government to be incredibly paranoid and strict with its oversight because they hold all the risk.
But the technology is just moving so much faster than the treaty can possibly handle.
Exactly. And this is where the nightmare scenario outlined in the Aerospace Corporation paper comes in. Flags of convenience.
Like you see in the maritime shipping industry.
Precisely. If you want to avoid taxes or safety regulations with a giant cargo ship, you register it in Panama or Liberia, countries with loose rules. The paper warns that if U.S. regulations remain too slow and cumbersome, space companies might do the same thing.
So SpaceX could, move its launch operations to where?
Hypothetically, anywhere with a coastline and a government willing to write them a friendly law. A small island nation could say, hey, come launch from our territory. No FAA, no lengthy environmental reviews, just pay us a hefty fee.
But a rocket isn't a cargo ship. The risks are so much higher.
No. A rocket is a controlled explosion with the energy equivalent of a small tactical nuclear weapon. If you have multiple companies launching these massive vehicles from places with no internationally recognized safety standards, the risk to everyone else in orbit and to people on the ground under the flight path skyrockets. It is a geopolitical disaster waiting to happen.
So regulation is the true invisible bottleneck. It's the dark matter of the entire space industry.
It is. And right now, the regulators in Washington are fighting with each other over turf. You have the FCC trying to regulate space junk because no one else is. And you have Supreme Court rulings that are questioning the authority of these agencies. It's a complete mess.
Okay, so assuming we can somehow navigate that regulatory mess, let's look forward. Section 6, the future outlook. What happens next?
Well, the immediate focus for SpaceX is Mars. We are in 2026. The orbital transfer window, the time when Earth and Mars align for the most fuel-efficient trajectory, opens late this year.
So the Armada is getting ready to launch.
That is the plan. The current manifest is for roughly 5 uncrewed starships to make the trip.
5. At once. That's not a test flight, that's a logistical invasion.
It's a logistical stress test of the entire system.
Yeah.
And it's becoming an international effort. The Italian Space Agency has already contracted with SpaceX to put scientific experiments on that first Mars flight. This is no longer just a SpaceX project.
And what about closer to home? The Artemis program and the moon.
Artemis III, the mission to land humans back on the moon, is currently scheduled for 2027. But the big hurdle there is what engineers call the boil-off problem.
Physics again.
Physics again.
Mm-hmm.
The propellants, liquid oxygen and liquid methane, are cryogenic. They want to turn into gas and vent away in the warm vacuum of space.
Right.
So to get one Starship lander all the way to the moon, you first need to fully refuel it in Earth orbit. And because of boil-off, that requires a high teens number of tanker launches, maybe 15 or 16 Starship launches, all in rapid succession, to fill the lander's tank before too much of the fuel boils away.
16 launches just to support one mission. That is a logistical ballet on a scale that has never even been attempted before.
Never. And you can tell NASA's very nervous about it. SpaceX, on the other hand, is supremely confident they can do it. That tension between the old space culture of NASA and the new space culture of SpaceX is palpable in all the planning documents.
I want to end this section on a really positive note about the science. You mentioned this idea of astronomy 2.0.
This is the silver lining in all of this. This is the payoff for science. Think about the James Webb Space Telescope. It cost $10 billion. Why was it so expensive?
Because it was incredibly complex with the unfolding mirrors and the sun shield.
Exactly. It had to be an origami masterpiece to fold up and fit inside the tiny fairing of an Ariane 5 rocket. That complex folding mechanism was the biggest failure point, so they had to spend years and billions of dollars testing it.
But Starship
has a 9-meter diameter payload bay. You don't need to fold anything. You can launch a massive, solid 8-meter mirror, just like a ground-based telescope. And you can make it out of cheap, heavy glass and steel because the rocket can lift 150 tons to orbit. You don't need exotic, lightweight beryllium.
So we can build bigger, better, simpler telescopes for a fraction of the cost, just because the truck is bigger.
Exactly. It completely changes the economics of discovery. We could have a whole fleet of super telescopes, each more powerful than Hubble, for the price of one James Webb. It's a new paradigm for science.
It really is a convergence of all these different fields.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try to pull this entire massive conversation together.
If you look at the thread that runs through everything we've talked about, it's really a single causal chain, a domino effect.
Go on, lay it out for me.
You have an AI revolution that is creating a near infinite demand for energy. That energy demand is forcing a revolution in battery and grid technology, the megablocks, the grid-forming inverters. That AI capability, once it's powered up, allows us to solve the problem of labor through robotics with Optimus. It allows us to accelerate material science and biology. And at the exact same time, Starship is opening up the physical expansion of humanity, giving us a place to use all those robots on other worlds.
So energy enables AI. AI enables robots. And robots and AI are enabled by space.
Exactly. It's a closed loop of acceleration. Each technology feeds back and accelerates the others. But the one speed limiter in the whole system
Is the paperwork.
is the regulation. It's the human systems. We are talking about gigawatt-scale factories, millions of humanoid robots, and rockets that catch themselves on giant steel towers. The engineering is moving at Mach 10. The laws and treaties are moving at walking speed.
It is a breathtaking and honestly a terrifying and wonderful moment to be alive.
It truly is.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to mull over, something to take with them. We talked about the bootloader theory, this idea that we might be a transitional species, and we talked about the abundance economy, where work as we know it becomes optional.
Right.
If that really happens. Say that E's article about verb ideas is right, and creativity becomes the only form of productivity that has economic value. Are we ready for that?
What do you mean by that, ready?
I mean, are we ready educationally, emotionally? Our entire school system, our entire culture for the last 200 years has been built on training people for necessary work. Learn to code, learn to do accounting, be efficient, be productive.
And then suddenly the machine is infinitely more efficient than you could ever be.
Exactly. If the machine provides the material abundance and the robot does the physical labor, the human is left with a completely blank canvas. And a blank canvas can be the most terrifying thing in the world if you've never been taught how to paint.
That's a profound thought. If we no longer need to struggle for our survival, we will have to learn to struggle for our meaning. And that might be a much harder struggle.
Are we preparing our kids for a world where the only unique value you can add is your curiosity, your creativity, your humanity? It's something to think about as you watch the next Starship launch or read the next headline about AGI.
Indeed.
Until the next deep dive, keep your batteries charged and your eyes on the stars.